I'm just curious, and I'm not trying to make you feel bad, because I'll tell you my shame story. How many of you had ever heard of e-waste until you read the stuff in here? How many of you never heard of it? Yeah? I hadn't heard of it until I started teaching this class. And you know, I'm not, whatever it is, but I'm not disconnected. I'd never heard of this until I started teaching. Had you? And we started, okay, it's just me.
But I'm trying to think when or where. It wasn't
Okay,
certainly not something I've thought about for a long time.
so she's certainly raising awareness. What else is she doing? I think there's a couple of other things she's trying to do.
Motivating shop green.
Okay, so raising awareness, she's trying to raise, she's trying to motivate. I like to shop green.
There's always a to after a motivate. Motivate to something.
Okay. Pedro.
To think about the consequences.
Okay, she's certainly trying to, I'm going to use that later. So she wants us to think about consequences. I think there's one other thing she's trying to do. Julio?
Explain how the system works.
Huh? So, a woman's voice.
Lena
over
said
here.
that.
How the system works.
Okay, she's trying to raise awareness, show us how the system works. Okay, so,
Coalesce people so that they work together to find a solution.
I think,
okay, so there's a sense in which, go ahead, Julio.
I just think that one of the main things that she's getting across is we need legislation that will address that and needs to be supported.
Okay, so both of you, I think you're sort of saying the same thing. She's advocating for policy. When we get to the lecture on accommodation, one of the things I will admit is that we're talking about epidictic and deliberative, about which more in about half an hour. But I recognize those aren't completely separate, isolated, pure categories. You get a lot of things that are both. This one tends to be more epidictic, but it does have a deliberative. It is making an argument for policy. She's doing both at the same time. Okay, what are the key concepts? Okay, I'm thinking about accommodation. What are the key concepts that she talks about?
Waste.
Huh?
Waste.
I don't know that waste is an abstract concept. She certainly talks about waste. That's a thing, but there are at least three concepts that you will have run into as theoretical concepts in your graduate courses in
You said it,
sustainability.
Paula.
Moore's law.
Okay, so one of them is,
Moore's law?
well, Moore's law is a fact or a concept. I'll buy that one.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Pedro?
Recycling.
Okay, not just recycling. What about it? You might not have picked it. Certainly she's talking about Moore's law. He's talking about recycling, but,
Environmental impact.
huh?
Environmental impact.
She's talking about Moore's law. She's talking about recycling.
It has to be smart recycling. So
She's
yeah.
talking about environmental impact. She talks about, when she's talking about policy, she's talking about take-back policies, possibility. Now, there are at least three things. There's one you will have learned in sustainability and economics. There is at least one you will have learned from Senshaw, and probably two from Senshaw in their classes.
Externalities.
Okay, she uses fancy language. She talks about externalities. She does it so well you didn't pick it up. What are the other sustainability concepts? Abstract things you learn in graduate classes.
I don't know if this fits what you just said. I don't know if this fits what you just said, but planned obsolescence. Planned obsolescence.
Well, planned obsolescence. I'm gonna put that as a common term.
Field management.
That's what I am, planned obsolescence. It's called retirement. About 6 years, I get to go be planned obsolescence. I'm going to say these are kind of colloquial terms, but technical graduate course in sustainability.
Non-field management.
Life cycle.
Huh?
Designed to last.
Designed to last, okay.
Life cycle.
Huh?
Common pool resources, maybe?
Say that again?
Common pool.
Common pool of resources, you've got the term.
I said, brother, life cycle.
Okay, you're in Senshaw's class. She says life cycle. And she illustrates these concepts by talking about things like Moore's law and recycling and environmental impact. But these are, and there's at least, there's one more technical term. You're not gonna see it because she shows it to you visually, all the way through the pictures. The thing starts with it. What does Senshaw teach? Huh?
How to management e-waste.
Okay, she's trying to tell you how to manage e-waste, but what does Senshaw teach? Professor Skay.
Systems.
System thinking.
She shows you that picture, and she says, you know, they're digging it over here, then it goes, she shows you the whole, she shows you a closed loop system. So you've got this funny little graphic, cartoony thingy, and in 7 minutes, it does a pretty good job of explaining at least 3 of the core concepts of your graduate program. Economic externalities, life cycle analysis, and systems analysis. And it does it so nicely, nobody even really kind of notices. How does this, what am I gonna call this, comic?
Animation.
How does this animation, how does it make you feel when you watch this? How do you feel? And why is that important? Why is it important? How do you feel? Why is it important? Why do you feel this way? How do you feel?
Yeah.
I'm going to sound like an old-fashioned English professor. How do you feel about this character?
Terrible. Yeah.
Huh? Well, does it make you feel terrible? Okay, is it just terrible? Oh, you don't have the video on, do you?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, okay.
Let's go.
I was about to say something I shouldn't say on film.
Yeah.
You know, oh, phooey, we're all going to die. Is that all you feel?
I felt like we made a connection with some things that we have similar.
Okay, she certainly makes a connection with you as viewers. You know, when she holds up that thing, I've got one of those.
Yeah, same.
And, you know, a lot of what she does is, yeah, I've done that. Yeah, that's my life. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I'm, okay.
You accept what you say as true.
Okay, you accept what she say. Why? Isn't she just some wacko, you know, tree hugger, crunchy, you know, enviro-Nazi? I've actually been called most of those names in the past. When I lived in Vermont, you were a tree hugger or a crunchy. My students would say, oh, you're one of those crunchies. So why do you trust her?
I think people can relate to what she's saying.
Certainly, as the woman in the back, Ann, is it? Amy.
Joanne.
Joanne.
Oh, Joanne.
Amy.
Wait, no. Okay, sorry.
Lady in the back
Oh, okay.
said, you know,
Good to know, Joanne.
you trust her partly because you can identify with her, partly because she's not, you know, pretending she knows more than you are or that she's perfect and that we're corrupt. You know, she doesn't seem like she has an axe to grind. That's one of the ways you trust her. So we've got 2 questions. My first question, thank you, is how do you feel and why do you trust? Julio says terrible. Why do you feel terrible?
Somebody else said terrible. No, yeah.
When I saw the Chinese characters, when they export the trash like e-waste into China,
Yeah.
that makes me feel like terrible.
Sure, I can imagine. Is that all you feel in this video? Or animation?
Well, I was gonna say, she's kind of showing you how you're participating in the problem.
And she says, while I'm keeping my family safe, I'm poisoning somebody else's family in Guiyu, China. So she does include herself as well as us as part of the problem. Oh, guilt trip, man. But one of the reasons you trust her is she includes herself as part of the problem. So, how else? Is it just me, or does anybody in here at all feel, you know, a little bit of something other than terrible depression?
I feel about guilty because every time when the new products came out, we were so happy to buy them, and it has improved the production, those producers to make more and make quicker.
Yeah, so we're implicated in this system of hyperconsumption where every 18 months we have to get a new something. As opposed to me, I do it about every 6 or 7 years, but that's just because I'm slow at learning technology, and once I learn how to use a piece of technology, I don't want to let it go. Chris?
I don't feel bad. I recycle my electronics, and I'm not really very good with the whole empathy towards people thing. So.
Okay, not good at the empathy towards people thing.
Don't bother me.
Thanks
Does
for
does
coming
anybody in
clean.
here feel at all good or hopeful?
Uh,
Why would you
Sarah,
feel
yeah.
hopeful? This is a terrible problem.
The animation style, it's not,
Partly because it's animated, you know.
Yeah, Sarah.
Sarah?
The part where she discusses how, we can make better choices, we can make better design choices in particular.
Okay, so, you know, you feel hopeful because there are solutions?
Yeah,
There are alternatives? Anybody else? One of the things
No.
you,
Yep.
I feel like being motivated,
Okay.
because we can do something to change the situation.
Motivated.
okay,
Ooh, fancy.
that's me. That is, she doesn't just say, you're all gonna die. She says, there are things we can do. We can perhaps get take-back laws. We can design things so they're not designed for the dump. We can design them so that they can be reused and recycled, that pieces, components can be replaced, that we can put all those big brains on our side. She says, good job, guys, to reinvent this material. So, you know, you might feel hopeful because there's the possibility of redesigning better. One of the things you learn.
She is fear because e-waste is hazardous waste, and when it contaminates environmental, it result in effect health.
Okay, so, you know, you feel terrible because the e-waste releases all these toxins like the 5 pounds of lead into your environment, and it's not just in China. She says in her own city in Silicon Valley, and then she shows you the data on IBM workers who have 40% more miscarriages and all this. So, you know, there's a sense in which everybody is sharing the pain here. It's not just in China or Ghana or Nigeria or.
I guess I'd say I feel the opposite of that. I feel hopeless just because as an individual who studies environmentalism and sustainability, it's difficult to say that we're going to accomplish all these things being only one person out of a billion on the planet.
Okay. Sarah?
I was just gonna say, usually I feel this way about like when I'm reading this kind of stuff or learning about it. This video, something about it is really light, like it's not too heavy. I don't feel like, oh my god, I wanna just die now.
Yeah. Like the National Geographic piece that we're going to get to talking about, I feel like has much more, is a little more crushing on the soul.
Part of what I'm trying to get at is, and there's been a ton of research on this, if you are talking about a sustainability or environmental issue or a climate change issue, and all you do is lay out, look at how terrible this is, look at how overwhelming this is, look at how seemingly inevitable this is, it is in a sense counterproductive. People are just overwhelmed. They feel guilty, they're terrified, they're overwhelmed, and they shut down, and it has the opposite. It doesn't motivate anybody to do anything. It motivates them to pull the covers over their head, to turn off the TV, to stop listening to you, and just say, okay, that's more than I can deal with, and, you know, buy another, you know, get in their Hummer and drive down to the store and buy 3 more computers because it feels good to, you know, do what.
It's called retail therapy.
Yes, what my wife calls retail therapy.
Yeah.
And it's, I look at this and think, okay, this is this terrible problem, but she does at least say, there are things we can do. We can put in policy, take back laws. We can use these guys to redesign things. There is hopefully, you apparently don't feel this way. She tries to give us some sense that there's enough of us
Weirdo.
that we can maybe change things.
Although I think Paola's comment perhaps does speak to, because the way you phrased it, you said, usually when I'm reading these kinds of things, sustainability, speak to audience differentiation, like the people in this room for whom many of these concepts are already familiar, and you have a sense of the scope of problems even beyond e-waste. are perhaps a different audience with a different emotional reaction than somebody who doesn't consider themselves concerned with sustainability in general, and is able to treat this perhaps as a slightly more contained problem than probably,
I've just finished rereading.
so. Oh, when you're done, Andy and Chris
Go ahead.
wanted to say something.
Yeah, just to say that we are pretty much sustainability students, and even sometimes when I read stuff or I watch stuff, I tune out because it's too much.
Mhm.
And then if you think of people who are not as concerned or not as informed, they'll tune out a lot quicker. But we have a guy in the other class, he always has a orange shirt, and whenever he talks on the video lectures, it sounds like all these statistics and facts where everything is just going to hell and nothing you can do about it. And after a few minutes, you just like, oh, you're hearing him talking, but that's about it.
Yeah.
Because he paints a picture that there's nothing you can do, you know, whatever you do is never going to be enough. And all the numbers show that it will change.
The technical term you're looking for is hell in a handbasket.
Yeah.
And that is not a trivial point. My point here about her is, if that's all she did, nobody would watch this. You know, it would be like, you know, watching the business news or the stock market report or the report on the wars that we're fighting. It would be so depressing you'd tune it out. On the other hand, there are going to be purists who are going to attack her for saying, look, it's a really serious problem and she's trivializing it, making light of it, you know, making fun of it, and you know, everything's going to be okay, we'll just invent something new. And I don't know that that's right either, but the point I've been trying to make, and I think you're making it for me, is if all you do is show me 15 bazillion statistics about how horrible this is and what the consequences are and how grim it is, it will be counterproductive if what you're trying to do is get people to be motivated, getting people to pay attention, getting people to care. They're going to shut down.
Yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, I was gonna say, not with the, I know exactly who you're talking about, orange shirt with his, we're all gonna die, which is fine and all, but like, I think that not just statistics, but if you just trying to make people feel bad, if she was just like, oh, you're killing kids in India and China because you're throwing your waste away. No one wants to feel that way. No one wants to think that, you know, they're the one that's killing babies in another country. So you gotta, you know, approach that lightly. I think a lot of time in, you know, sustainability, it's usually one or the other. It's either like doom and gloom, or like everything's gonna be fantastic, which maybe it's somewhere in the middle. Maybe it is doom and gloom, but no one really wants to.
Well, that's sort of what
doom and gloom.
that's sort of what she's
Yeah.
doing. There's one other strategy she's using here, and I don't know that anybody's going to pick it up. Maybe we should rewatch this. It's the us and them.
Oh,
Good
yeah,
guys,
yeah.
bad guys. We will rewatch it. Why doesn't she give us a lot of data? She gives us some data. How does she do it? Why doesn't she give us a bunch of charts and numbers? I mean, really?
She gives the picture with the IBM people. And
She
how
gives you a
they're
picture, a
saying-
cartoon picture of a woman and a man, and you see
Yeah.
their kind of fake insides, you know, and you see 40% cancer, brain cancer, blood. So she is giving you data, but not those great big charts. How else does she do it? I get to be Moore.
Yeah.
Speed, then instead of Moore,
Processing power.
it becomes more.
Yeah.
You know, so, I mean, why doesn't she give us a whole lot of data? Why doesn't she give us a table with some facts? Why aren't there numbers attached to this?
Nobody wants to see that. No one pays attention.
Nobody's going to watch it. Nobody's going to pay attention. It's,
We-
I mean, if you think about the article you read on e-waste and the piece on high-tech trash, you know, the article on e-waste had all these charts and graphs and scatter plots. And I'm just curious, how many of you actually spent a lot of time reading those charts and graphs and scatter plots?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Historic math, I tuned out.
Okay.
Well, in addition to, even if people paid attention and read the tables of numbers, we covered this 2 weeks ago, the rationalist paradox, right? That's not a winning strategy. We know that.
Okay, so what, besides, I don't think she's trying to make you feel guilty. I think she's trying to make you feel implicated. There's a certain sense in which I remember, trying to remember how far back this was. I remember 1974 being in Philosophy 101, and my philosophy professor said, you can't be held responsible and be guilty for something over which you have no control. If you're falling off a if somebody pushes you off a building and you're falling 20 stories down and you land on someone and kill them, it's not your fault. You're not responsible for killing them because you can't flap your wings and not hit them. There's a sense in which you feel guilty, but I think she at least suggests you feel implicated, but how do you feel guilty when, in a sense, it's out of my control? You know, I am a single person. This is how our consumer society works. She's walking a line between saying, you don't have to care about it, and saying, you are a bad person, because she says, I do it too, and I don't want to. So she's not trying to make you feel guilty, but what values is she appealing to in here? This is not the rational paradox. She's making emotional, affective appeals to particular kinds of values. Okay, she's certainly appealing to your sense of responsibility.
Yeah.
She is trying to
Chris
get
is
you
like,
to
I don't know
feel.
about that.
Head down with the person.
She is trying to get you to feel empathy. My family, they're just like me. There's a sense in which I think empathy is a sense of justice. Thank you.
Sure. That'll be helpful with
it's
the cheat
not
sheet.
it's not just that we use the machines and generate it and dump it on less developed or less powerful or less wealthy countries. What else?
She's wanting you to feel concerned or to be scared of the toxins being put up into the air.
She certainly wants you to feel concerned or scared, but what value is what master frame is she appealing to from the last lecture? A couple of others. One is justice.
To get you to the concern, to get you to the fear.
To get you to be concerned, to get you to be feared, to get you to be empathetic. What value since we need to move on, I'm just saying she's talking about fairness. Now, I have one last question. How do you can get her, she gets you to trust her, I think. Partly, somebody said this, partly because she includes herself. Why else might you trust her? Partly you identify with her.
Her use of language.
Okay, I hadn't thought of that. What do you mean by
I
her
like
use
that.
of language?
She's not using Windows 8.
Yes.
Okay, so you're right. Not equal to, Windows 8. This may be the only thing you remember 30 years from now about this. I had this weird guy named Windows 8 in class. Certainly word choice and language. It's casual, it's familiar. It's not the language from the e-waste article. I'm going to suggest one of the ways is there's a strategy that runs through here of us versus them. There's the bosses, and there's us, the people, and even the engineers. Chris?
The way she's dressed too, she's wearing normal casual clothes. She's not standing up there in like a suit and tie or
Yeah,
a lab coat.
yeah,
with
she looks like us.
PhD telling us that she's smarter than us and we're just here.
This is like from the Meyer introduction piece, the outsider critic. She's clearly not occupying the stance of outsider critic.
Yeah, she doesn't at all come off as, listen to me, I have a PhD, let me explain this to you and why you're wrong.
Yeah.
The Myers piece. She sounds like us saying, look, I'm guilty of this too, we can't avoid it, it's every day. And yeah, you can imagine they spent a huge amount of time probably with focus groups deciding what color shirt she should wear. Like when one of those presidential candidates spends hours picking out just the right ties so he doesn't look quite so dorky. I think that's got it. Do we need to see it again, or do we want to move on? You want to see it again?
Let's watch the first couple of minutes.
Even though Us Against Them came out several times, she did make an attempt to clarify that it's not that them are intentionally.
That's the evil geniuses part,
the-
right, that you're thinking of?
Engineers are not out to make stuff.
The engineers aren't, but the bosses are. The bosses never get recuperated in this. The daddy Wallbucks who comes with the shirt with the dollar sign on it, right? The guy that comes with the won't come out if I do that.
They may not be villains, but they're still
they're
putting
still the
bottom
bad
line,
guys. I mean,
yeah.
this is a good guys, bad guys story, and we all, including those of us identifying with her, are the good guys here, which is, I think, how she mitigates your sense of feeling guilty and helpless, because there's a lot of us, and we're not bad.
Yeah.
Want to watch the first few minutes of it?
Yeah. So now that we have ripped the fun out of it by explaining.
Yeah, now that we've, back in a former life when I used to teach literature to undergraduates, they'd all say, you know, I really liked this novel before you explained how it worked. Now it's just work. It's not fun anymore.
Not fun anymore. All right, so we'll watch the first 2 or 3 minutes, and you can think about the tone and look at how she's
And I may
dressed.
talk over this a little bit.
This is a story about a
I'll
world
turn it down.
obsessed with stuff. It's a story about a system in crisis.
Systems analysis, cradle to grave.
We're trashing each other, and we're not even having fun. The good thing is that when we start to understand the system,
Over again,
we start
system.
to see lots of places to step in and turn these problems into solutions.
And this is why you shouldn't feel bad. There are lots of places to turn these problems into solutions. She's being hopeful.
The other day, I couldn't find my computer charger. My computer is my lifeline to my work, my friends, my music. So
Oh,
I
I
looked everywhere.
Like that
Even
part,
in
that's where
world
she's
with this
acknowledging
list. I know
it's
you have
okay
one
for
too.
these
Tiny
electronics to be
little
important
chargers,
to us.
a set
It's our
of
lifeline.
millions of electronics
Yeah,
press.
she's just like
How
us.
do they end up with so many of these things? It's not like I'm always after the latest gadget. My old devices broke or became so obsolete I couldn't use them anymore. And not one of these old chargers fits my computer. Ugh! This isn't just bad luck. It's bad design.
She's not a bad
I
person.
call it
It's bad
design.
design. She didn't do it.
Design for the dump sounds crazy, right? But when
Nice
you're
short
trying to sell
bumper
lots
sticker.
of stuff, it makes perfect sense. It's a key strategy of the companies that make our electronics. In fact, it's a key part of our whole unsustainable materials economy. Design for the dump means making stuff to be thrown away quickly. Today's electronics are hard to upgrade, easy to break, and impractical to repair. My DVD player broke and I
Again,
took
all
it to a
things you
shop
have
to
no
get fixed.
control over.
The repair guy wanted $50 just
I've
to
been
look
there.
at it.
I've done
New
exactly
one at Target
that.
costs
Haven't
$39
you?
bucks. In the 1960s, Gordon Moore, the giant brain and semiconductor pioneer, predicted that
I think that's
electronics
funny.
designers
You guys
could
don't
double
think that's funny,
processor
right?
speed in
I think it's
18
big that
months.
is funny.
So far, he's been right. This is called Moore's Law. But somehow the bosses of these genius designers got it all twisted up. They seem to think that Moore's Law means every 18 months we have to throw out our old electronics and buy more. Problem is, the 18 months that we use these things are just a blip in their entire life cycle. And that's where these dump designers aren't just causing a pain in our wallets,
Got
they're
life
causing
cycle
a global
analysis.
toxic emergency. You
Systems.
see, electronics start where most stuff starts, in mines and factories.
She'll
Many
get
of our
back.
gadgets are made from 1,000 different materials, shipped from around the world to assembly plants. There, workers turn them into products using loads of toxic chemicals like PVC, mercury, solvents, and flame retardants. Today, this usually happens in far-off places that are hard to monitor, but it used to happen near my home in Silicon Valley, which, thanks to the electronics industry, is one of the most poisoned communities in the US. IBM's own data revealed that its workers making computer chips had 40% more miscarriages and were
front of that
significantly
book
more
said,
likely
"Don't
to die from
distribute."
blood, brain, and kidney cancer. The same thing is starting to happen all around the world. It turns out the high-tech industry isn't as clean as its image. So after its toxic trip around the globe, it lands in my
Good
hands.
or-
I love it for a year or so, and then it starts drifting further from its place of honor on my desk or in my pocket. Maybe it spends a little time in my garage before being tossed out. And that brings us to disposal, which we think of as the end of its life. But really, it's just moved on to become part of the mountains of e-waste we make every year.
We may be using up too much time.
So,
All right. He
That's okay.
said, having lost his phone.
Oh, no, it's right here. Yes, we're much behind time, but that's okay.
Okay. Oh, we're running behind time. That's an especially unusual example. The piece on e-waste you read, the one from the Science of the Total Environment, the technical one, that's actually not a bad accommodation of that technical article. It hit almost all the key pieces of that long piece of impenetrable, data-driven science. So I want to talk a little bit about
For the compared use basis.
Right. Thank you.
So I'll clean, you talk.
Okay. She's going to clean while I talk. you've read those two pieces, the e-waste piece from the Science Journal and high-tech trash. What are the differences? What did you notice? We will talk about these at length, but what did you notice as differences between these two pieces? All right, let's start this way. Tell me about the technical piece, the e-waste. Tell me what's significant or noticeable about it, and then we'll see if we can figure out what the contrasting similarity difference, if you will, to the National Geographic piece is.
It gives you more specific information, like the amount of people who live in Lee.
Okay, so this is the e-waste piece. Very specific, very detailed. You said information, I'll say data. What did you get in high-tech trash?
It was more like a narrative.
Okay, you get a narrative.
Word.
You get quite literally a story. Characteristic, comparison, what did you notice about either one of these pieces? That is to say, if you see what the forensic piece is doing, the piece of science that does forensic rhetoric, and the piece of epideictic that does, or the piece of popular stuff that does epideictic rhetoric, what you're going to be doing. What are the differences between these? What characterizes the two pieces? I mean, just quickly, we will talk about this, but just broad strokes, what do you notice?
The narrative begins by describing the environment, how you can smell the burning of different materials.
Those questions that you guys were asking at the end here in more detail.
If you would like to follow along, please head into the modules on Canvas, and under assignment sheets, and I see you, Paula, under modules on Canvas, there's a section called assignment sheets. Thank you, Carl. Whew. All right.
Let's get started.
If you would like to play along, there is a section under modules on Canvas called assignment sheets and materials. And so for each project, there is an assignment sheet link right here for the accommodation project if you would like to go ahead and open that up. And you had a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, are we going to be writing in epideictic and different types of...
And a deliberative, yes. That'll be, there's
Separate
different
assignments.
dates. Yeah. They're covered in the same project, but they're different assignments due on different days.
We used to do them together,
It's just
but
too much.
it was kind of hard for people to jump from one thing to another, and it kind of got confusing.
Yeah.
So we've separated them. You do epideictic accommodation of a forensic piece, and later we will talk separately about deliberative rhetoric. We will walk through things like this again, and you'll do the other one. We're separating them for clarity.
Yeah. And in fact, if you recall, I have this pretty little chart that I made. So the epideictic article is going to be due 2 weeks from today. And the policy deliberative article is due
Week 8.
4 weeks from today, and we'll talk about it in a couple of weeks. Okay, so that is that.
So here's the assignment itself.
Yes, this is the assignment itself. Please, again, you should all have permission to enter this. The assignment project, as we just discussed at great length, accommodation is a specific term within rhetoric. One point that I wanted to highlight is that when we say accommodation, we are referring to both the act of accommodating itself and also the piece in question. So, hello, Joshua Barber. This is the danger of Google Docs. I once was showing a class of engineers a Google thing, and I had a friend like pop up because I have the messaging on my computer just pop up, and he was like, "Hey, what's up?" And I was like, "Oh no, this is the danger." The terminology, just so you can get it straight. So accommodation means both the act of moving from that forensic piece we were talking about here to the National Geographic piece, right? It can describe the act of It also can refer specifically to the end product. So the National Geographic is an accommodation of the technical information over here, and then the verb that we use is accommodate, right? So when you are making the move from one to the other, you are accommodating. So just to be clear about terminology. Accommodation, one thing that did not explicitly come up in so many words as Carl was talking about it, is that, but I think it's very important, is that accommodation is not a matter of dumbing it down. Oftentimes, and this is what you see in the Einstein quote that Carl used in a lecture, often when you hear people talk about moving from technical information to some sort of publicly accessible, it is presented as though it's some sort of dumbing down, some sort of, oh, we got to make it simple for those simple people in the public. And as I hope was apparent to you by the end of the comparison of the two pieces in Carl's lecture, it's much more complicated than that. It's not just a matter of taking concepts and using smaller words, right? You're using all kinds of new and different rhetorical strategies in order to figure out how to best appeal to who your new readers are, what they're reading for, and what they want to do with that reading. It is not like if you took that e-waste technical piece and literally just used smaller words and didn't use all the chemical symbols, that wouldn't be an accommodation, right? Dumbing it down is just, I want to make sure that that is not the framework that you're going into this assignment with. The project gives you the chance to practice this crucial skill of accommodation on two different deliverables, which was Paula's question. So an appetite piece, much like the National Geographic, which was Michelle's question. And later on, we're going to do a deliberative policy piece. So it's moving into more of an argumentative territory, trying to argue for policymakers what they should be doing with this information. Yes, sir.
Dummy it down before and everything, but what if you to a way you're simplifying something to,
Absolutely. You're definitely simplifying the concepts, right? It's not simplifying in the sense of making less technical, but in some ways you're complicating them because you're adding complex emotions and descriptions, right? So I think in some ways it's more useful to think of it as moving away from technical terminology and focus on data to an epidictic focus on emotion, on appeal, on wonder, right? And so even the kind of simple complex, well, they're just complex in different ways. Does that make sense? Yeah. You have 3 technical articles that you get to choose from to accommodate. So we're not asking you to accommodate the one that you read for tonight, the e-waste piece. We just found some great e-waste examples, so that was our little sort of case to illustrate. And then when we look at a policy, an example of a policy piece down the road, that will also be related to e-waste. So you'll have the opportunity to return to that Journal of the
Total Environment.
Total Environment piece if you would like to revisit that when you read the policy piece. Yeah, Patel.
So the article we choose for the epidemic piece we have to write, which we need to now, has to be the same one we're going to use for the other one?
That's a good question. The way it's written here on the assignment sheet suggests that absolutely that is true. As far as I'm concerned, I don't care one way or the other, but you're then making more work for yourself because you have to take the time to master 2 technical pieces.
It's not going to matter to us, and we're not going to check it. We
Yeah.
probably won't keep track of it.
Honestly, how would we know? Because it's going to be 2 weeks apart, and we're grading 50 of these.
But if you've spent the time to really read very carefully through one of these technical pieces and know it inside and out well enough to do that, having done a fair amount of this stuff in my career, you really have to know that article as well or better than the guy that wrote it. And why do that?
Or
Two
women,
separate.
we don't know.
Guy maybe is
generic
multiple
guy,
genders. The person who wrote it. Thank you. You can, but I would think keep your work. You guys have enough work to do already.
Yeah. So absolutely, if you work on the first one and put the time in and decide you hate the topic, then change. We won't notice. Yes, ma'am. Sam.
I'm assuming technically the papers have to be Arial 11.5.
We'll get there.
Okay.
Almost there. So you're anticipating me. You have, as we were just discussing, 3 choices. The first one, the Hjorth article, was given to us by, this is the Sustainable, the Systems Dynamics. So this came from Senshaw?
That was from Central.
Yeah, Senshaw sent us that one. So this is something that actually is covered in that class if you've taken it already. The second one came from
Brett.
George. No, Brett. And
Dr. Kendra Michael.
Yes. So that's systems dynamics and water. So again, this is concepts that are familiar. And then the third one is of our choosing. It's sustainable manufacturing. This is actually a little bit of overlap with e-waste, but it's specifically about particular manufacturing processes and getting a little deeper into life cycle assessment, right, and closed loop manufacturing. So you are welcome to choose any of those, but if you have already taken systems in water and want to, work on something you're already familiar with, then you have those options. Definitely, I would say at least read the abstracts of all of them before you choose. These articles that is incorrect. I moved them. I said they're available in the modules tab and the Canvas. They're not available on Canvas anymore. Trying to keep it simple. If you'll navigate back over for me, Carl, that would be awesome, to the syllabus tab, the Canvas tab, and then scroll up.
Oop.
Yeah.
Up or down?
Up. We need to go to the modules page on the left. I want to show you where they are. Yeah, modules, and then they're right there with the assignment sheet. So if you just scroll down, I have everything collected. Next section. Keep going. There we go. I have everything collected right there under the accommodation project tab.
Okay, accommodation project. So here are the 3 articles.
Yeah. And then there's a sample one, like Carl mentioned, that somebody actually wrote in this class previously that we'll look at here in a second. Okay, back to the assignment sheet. What?
Is the one the person wrote on one of those 3?
It's that fourth link.
It's-
There's a fourth link that says.
No,
like,
it's on
sample.
one of those 3 articles? No.
Oh,
it's on,
I see what. Yeah, it is.
It's on the sustainable manufacturing.
Oh, I thought you meant on one of the links. My bad.
It's
No,
on one
you
of the
meant
3.
top.
It is on one of those 3 articles that you
Yeah.
have available to you. Yes.
Yeah. That's why he gets paid the big bucks. It's on the JL piece right there. So as Carl was saying, the move to accommodate requires that you have a really deep understanding of the technical information that you're accommodating, so you can figure out what level of what level of non-technicality to move to, so you can figure out what an appropriate vehicle is for illustrating and describing the technical concepts, how you want to organize them, right? Do I need to start with the big concept and then maybe give a few details? Is there a different way in? You need to have a really, really firm grasp of the technical information. Yes?
Are you requiring a separate sheet where we describe what it is we're trying to do?
Nope. We're not doing a reflection, so this is a reflection memo, which we've done a lot. Yeah, we do a lot in other writing classes. We are asking you to identify, as Carl mentioned before, where you imagine this being published so we can imagine a context. And if you think it's a place that we wouldn't know, right, if it's like an obscure, not national profile magazine, you might want to include a little description that's like, hey, the people who read this are, et cetera, yeah, here we go, are, et cetera, et cetera. But what you are asking about the reflection memo, we will do that for the next assignment for our infographic. But for this one, no. Yes, Chris?
We use other sources just to get a better knowledge of what the person's talking
You are
about.
also anticipating me. Let me get to, yes. Okay,
Good
so let me
question.
do this. No,
Hang
that's
on to
great. That means that you see where we're going down this road. You're imagining how this process is actually going to work. So your first deliverable, and this is to Sam, I guess your question, 3 to 5 pages, double spaced, 1-inch margins, kind of standard font, Arial, Times New Roman, whatever, 12 points. If you need to go a little longer, in our experienced people, if you're going to go long, it's going to be on this one and not on the policy one. And if you want to go a little longer, that's fine. Keep in mind that we have to grade 50 of these. So, yeah. So we won't fault you for writing a 3-pager. Let's put it that way. You are going to start, the very first thing that you're going to want to do is one of these 2 things. So this is in order, but you might actually start here and then go here. If it were me, I'd probably think about what popular publication I would want to be publishing in, right? So, because that might help me think of an example of a case. Oh, thank you.
Pointer.
Oh, yeah, does this
The
help
little
me?
red.
Yes, thank you. Okay, popular publication, because, for example, I read a lot of articles in Wired magazine, and knowing Wired and knowing that Wired readers really enjoy reading about gadgets, they like robotics, like it's a certain kind of take on technology, right? Might help me do the next thing I need to do, which is to find a specific and interesting case that I can use as a vehicle. So in the National Geographic piece, the high-tech trash, there were several specific cases that got described and used to sort of forward the momentum of the technical concepts. So we had the location of the trash burning the recycling area in Africa, right? That's a case with characters. We also have the local, I guess, Patel, you were saying about, like, yay, Tampa, it's nice to see Tampa in here. That's a specific case populated by specific characters. When we look at the student's example here shortly, you'll see that he uses a specific case, which is the company Patagonia. And when we say case, we mean a very broad range of things. So a case, again, just as was true in the National Geographic, could be a location, right? Like this recycling center. God, it makes it sound so not terrible when you call it a recycling center. It's not a recycling center. This pit of terribleness. There's that. So that's sort of a location, right? Yob's company is a corporation or a company as a case, for example. With Patagonia, it's a little bit of a combination. Patagonia is a case as a company, but there is one figure that kind of emerges as the central interesting figure who is also kind of crucial to the case. So as you think about examples to illustrate whichever one of these technical sets of technical concepts you decide to talk about, be thinking about specifically, okay, is there a place, is there a company, is there a person, maybe there's a nonprofit, maybe you work with somebody here in town, or you have done work in the past that is related to those concepts. But you need to be able to anchor these abstract technical concepts into some real-world example in case.
Can I give you my example?
Please, go for it.
My favorite example, if you're talking about sustainable manufacturing, what's the most sustainable beer brewery in America? New Belgium Brewery in Colorado, not Fort Collins.
Really?
Not really. Yeah, it is Fort Collins.
Okay.
Anyway, there's actually an app on your phone you can pull up what are the most sustainable breweries. But if you were,
They're here too. They sponsor. I work for QTIP and Beautiful. They sponsor our beer clip.
Nice.
well, their central
That makes sense
brewery,
with the
their central
sustainability.
brewery is in, it's either Greeley or Fort Collins. But it's if you wanted to talk about sustainable manufacturing, say, okay, here's a place. Now, granted, they don't do remanufacturing,
Right.
but if you wanted to talk about somebody who has an example of sustainable manufacturing and make it interesting, especially to me, you can say, here's the most sustainable beer brewery in the world.
Yeah.
Look at what these people do and how they do it. And you'd have an interesting case to put flesh, if you will, on the conceptual bones of your accommodation. Am I making some sense?
Okay, so this takes us to Chris's question a little bit, which is you were asking that you conduct primary or secondary research to learn as much as possible about the case you've chosen to write about and the people who populate that case. That means if you also want to conduct research to help you understand the technical information from the article, that's fine. Like, there's no, by all means, like, we're not asking you to turn into experts on water systems. That's a different class, right? So whatever you need or whatever is useful to you to get a grasp on the technical information, like, go read Wikipedia on sustainable manufacturing for if it's a helpful place for you to start thinking about it. That's great.
Do I have to cite it like say I
Nope.
do?
Nope. Good question though, and you know what? I don't think that's covered explicitly here. We do. It should say somewhere in the reference or in the assignment sheet that we're not looking for a references list, like you would write for a paper.
I mean, you didn't see any of those in the high-tech crash piece from National Geographic.
Yeah.
They don't cite sources. That's,
Yeah.
You're not making argumentative claims to, factual proof that somebody can
Yeah.
check down. Nobody does that when you're reading National Geographic.
I think. Oh, did someone else? I thought you were pointing at something. I think I run into this all the time when we teach a lot of unusual genres in our classes over here, as well as over in the English department. I teach a lot of undergraduate technical communication classes, and it is often uncomfortable, I think, for students to not do all that work of the in-text citations and the reference lists. And I mean, you've done this with me before, Patel, and like it's weird when I'm like, no, I don't care. Like, that's not what this document looks like. National Geographic is not going to publish something with a reference list at the end. And so if we're grading you on your ability to produce something that looks looks like publications in National Geographic, then we don't want to reference this either. And it seems weird because probably like your whole college career, you've been hearing professors go on and on about plagiarism and Turnitin.com, and like, guess what? We trust you. We trust you to not be cheaters. So please, no references.
We're certainly no citations in the text.
Yeah, and there might be there might be places in your text where you say, in a recently published article, so-and-so argued that because it's somehow relevant to you, and so you can sort of like point to places, but you should absolutely not torture your prose in any way in order to somehow shoehorn something that looks like a citation in there. That's not what we want. Andy, did you?
So with the cases that we use to help drive it forward, can we just make those up?
Okay, next question.
The answer is no.
Please do not make up characters or narratives. So, no. This is why we're asking you to conduct some primary and or secondary research. Primary research, you may or may not know the difference between the two. Primary research means you're going out and collecting data yourself in the field. So in this instance, it would be acting more like a journalist. So let's say you have a case here in town. Does anyone have a case, local case in mind already? Anyone? No? Okay. Let's say you have a local case in town or a case that you have some in with. So you used to volunteer with this group somewhere else. You could call up people associated with it on the phone and do a 20 or 30 minute interview with them, and that's primary research. And then you get to include quotes from them in your story, just like the journalist does in the high-tech trash piece.
Yeah, you could go down and talk to John Yob at the Tampa recycling, thingy that has, and that would be primary research. You go out and gather the stuff yourself.
Yeah.
Can you do sort of like an editorial piece where you talk about an incident that happened to you?
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know that I would call that editorial. It sounds like what you're asking about is like personal writing. Yeah, absolutely. Like,
I wouldn't build it completely around, let me tell you something that happened to me, let me talk about me, my history.
But related to something.
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
how to put it, Annie Leonard relates it to her life.
Exactly.
The high-tech trash piece the guy talks about, I would hear, I saw this, you as first person I can show up in this piece, but it's not about you. I mean, it may be you refer to yourself as part of the case.
Yeah.
So if you
Well,
were,
I'm thinking of like Leopold does this, right? A lot of classic environmental writing is built around that there is a framework of personal writing in there, and the first person shows up all over the high-tech trash piece. So it's just that you want to be sure to balance that with actually getting the concepts in, right? And making the case appeal to a broad audience. Yeah. Does that work? Okay. So no, please don't make things up. You can conduct primary research, so like interview, or maybe you do a survey or something. But also, we're asking you to do this in 2 weeks. It's a relatively short paper. 2 weeks seems reasonable, but secondary research is probably much more in line with your schedules as busy working professionals going to college. So secondary research literally means you just go look up data that other people already collected. So in your case, what this might mean is, so let's say I want to write about the founder of Patagonia, I just go read a bunch of interviews that other journalists did, and then I can borrow some quotes from there, for example, right? So that's a little different. Like if you were actually publishing these pieces, you couldn't do that, right? Because we're on a timeline, we're saying that's okay. So just don't make up quotes, don't make up characters, but if you need to borrow details or quotes from other things that have been published that other people have written, or if you want to look up information about demographics or about whatever, you can go borrow all that. But again, no references needed for where you got it from. Okay, so that's everything, right?
Yep. Look at the cheat sheet
Yes.
quickly, and then
Any
look at
last
Brian.
questions on this? Yes, Andy. No, please. Questions are good.
So,
I would like to
whenever
clear
you one of
confusion.
those articles that are there,
Mhm.
then write one on it. Are we able to persuade them towards our personal view of whatever article?
That's an interesting question. I think you kind of have to, in that if you think about the difference between the forensic and the epideictic examples that we looked at, the forensic piece at least purported to be totally objective. Like, we're literally just reporting on a thing that is true true in the world. We're not moralizing, we're not ethical. This was the whole thing about like one makes you feel guilty and one doesn't, right? Versus the epidictic piece took a clear stance on this is a thing that's happening in the world and it's bad.
Yes and no. I don't, if I heard your question, your job isn't to say, I disagree with the guy that wrote the technical piece on systems analysis and water.
Wait, was that what you were asking?
Can we like take a position, either I agree with it or I don't
Agree with the technical article.
Yeah, the technical article.
Oh, I see what you, no.
Then you're not accommodating that piece. You're writing your own piece that says, okay, this guy has said this. I think he's wrong. Here's my theory of systems analysis and what it can do. To the extent that you're accommodating,
you're agreeing with what is there.
Well,
You're accepting. So it's not so much agreeing. It's if your job accommodation is the taking of information from genre to genre to genre, from audience to audience to audience. And the
purpose to purpose.
The moment that you are not picking that up and just moving context, the moment that you're agreeing or disagreeing or correcting or whatever, then you are suddenly in dialogue with that piece as opposed to adapting.
You're not. With an accommodation, if you remember Einstein says you got to figure out what the core concepts are, the key concepts are, and provide those to people in a way that is accessible, meaningful, and compelling. You're not saying he's wrong, those aren't right. There's a very real sense in which if you disagree with that article and think it's wrong, don't try to accommodate. If I'm a lawyer,
you have three choices.
If I'm a lawyer and I'm representing my client in court, I'm trying to make his case to the jury. I'm not going to say, well, really, he's a scumbag, send him to jail. You're not accommodating a piece if you're saying, I disagree with this.
Yeah.
That's a completely different task.
I'm glad they knew your questions better than I do. Anything else? No? Yep, no. And you can, we have, of course, next week to take questions again, and we are available via email as well. Yeah.
Another one. Well, English is not my first language. Do you maybe have some more examples of the type of writing you want, so we can try to, create some stuff?
Well, let's look at Brian's.
We can talk about this next time. This cheat sheet, whatever you want to call it, that Kegel and I put together, just summarizes what we've talked about.
Yeah.
Epidictic rhetoric on the bottom, forensic on the top. One talks about the past, one talks about the present. This is loaded, you can read through it, and we can talk about it. I think it would be better in our last 20 minutes.
I agree.
Bring up Brian's piece.
Where is that one? Where is that
I'm
one?
going to move it. It's just under the readings
Oh, the
right
same place,
now.
the cheat sheet? Okay.
But I'm going to move it to the
Assignments?
assignment part, so it's all just in one place. So there you go.
What it does is it summarizes like the last page, the last slide of my lecture. It summarizes. Here's the difference between this and this. Here are the things you do. It's a different kind of summary.
Yeah.
It's not a recipe, but it's a
It helps in the sense that it's a quick, like a reference sheet.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like in textbooks where at the end of the chapter they're like, here are the highlights. And you're like, why did I read the whole chapter? Why did you listen to us talk for 2 hours? Okay.
We're making ourselves redundant.
Yes.
So this is a paper written by one of our students in this class a couple of years ago. And that student, we're going to call her Annie. Annie had read the piece on sustainable manufacturing. And this is her epidictic accommodation. What she did was say, I'm writing this for Outside Magazine. Not that far off National Geographic. Write for a magazine you read. Don't write for something that you've never seen and you have to make it up as you go along. So let's look at...
Or website or blog or not just
or a
magazine.
website or a blog. And this is an example, this is sort of, I think, what you were asking. Here's an example of something written by a student sitting where you're sitting with the same article you're looking at. Whether you're a ski instructor on the mountain slopes of British Columbia, an avid mountain biker in the rugged terrain of Moab, Utah, a beach bum refusing to ever leave the breathtaking warmth of the Pacific coast, or even just an individual who finds peace and comfort on a daily stroll outside, we all have a love for the outdoors and what it has to offer us. This love of the outdoors carries over to a passion for the environment. this isn't gonna get published, but it's a student making her first stab at moving from technical stuff to something you might read in an outside magazine. We don't expect you to be Chris Carroll, who's the guy who wrote High Tech Trash.
Or Annie Leonard, or
But look at the moves this guy's making. Okay, identifying ski instructors, beach bums, just somebody walking around who likes to go for a stroll. Today's age is plagued with pollution, excessive waste, obesity, technical isolation, and disconnection from Mother Nature herself. With trends continuing down this path, the future outlook of the planet looks bleak, and that once alive feeling from the outdoors becomes extinct from human consciousness. I don't think I would ever
But
use
it's
that
funny
phrase.
that she makes, like, puts obesity there.
Huh?
yeah, it's a weird move, isn't it? Yeah.
It's like I'm obesity. Like, I can't
Yeah,
do
that was a
but
little.
it's like-
Well, he's talking about
Waste
outdoor
and
magazine people who go outdoors and run and work out.
Yeah.
That
It does seem
this
a little
isn't
odd
perfect.
on the list. Yeah.
This isn't letter perfect.
Well, this is part of why we want to
Which
show
is
you this.
personal, because she's like, oh,
Yeah.
fat, I'm obese.
Part of why this is a good example for you all to look at is that
Suck it up, prof.
this was an A paper, like, and it's easy for us to sit here and read it and critique it and recognize how it's not like super the years of experience, journalists, et cetera, et cetera. We're not looking for that. This is an A paper. When you sit down to write, like, well,
No, he's
yeah,
great in the sense that he's like very.
Yeah.
I'm sure she's gonna do a better job because it's not my first language, so even that,
yeah, yes.
it's
Well,
hard to write it.
we should look at the next sentence because this is an important move.
Okay.
However, fellow outdoor
However, this will be extinct from human consciousness. However, fellow outdoor lovers, such as ourselves, have begun taking great initiatives to put the environment back in its rightful place on this hierarchy we call life. I, myself, have taken drastic measures to reduce my environmental impact because the thought of physically losing Yellowstone National Park, where most of my childhood was spent, does not sit well with me.
The reason I said that's an important move, this is the Annie Leonard move, right? So things are terrible, however, and we covered however in our coherence and cohesion, right? It's a contrasting word. However, things are looking up. Like, if you want to feel good about life right now, keep reading, because it's going to be engaging and it's going to make you hopeful.
Okay, I forgot we have to scroll. However, most if not all of us are still causing a serious environmental damage in one specific area, our clothing choices. So he's using however to identify the problem here. Clothing choices. The design and manufacture of clothing, especially wear made to uphold extreme weather conditions, is one of the leading causes of environmental damage to our planet. So that winter waterproof insulated jacket you just bought for the upcoming ski season was most likely created in a carcinogen-filled factory from a poverty and toxic-stricken 9-year-old using cotton from a spray-ridden pesticide cotton farm that uses more water in one day than you use in a full year in your household, and then finally shipped thousands of miles to some warehouse waiting for someone like you to purchase it before it gets dumped as waste. You might cut that into more than one sentence, but
I kind of like the one sentence move.
it goes
just
on and on. Yeah, piling up how
feeling
crappy
environmental.
our clothes. I mean, does anybody know what fast fashion is?
Yeah.
One of my undergraduates wrote about this and taught me. Clothes that are made, fast, dirty, cheap, worn 2 or 3 times, and then thrown away, and they're incredibly wasteful. They're usually made in developing countries, and the toxics go into the water. And he's writing about clothing, about fashion. This is an everyday thing. Believe it or not, I never buy anything outdoorsy after I read this from this student, except from Patagonia. And I will spend the extra money to buy it from Patagonia.
Literally the same. This essay made me change my buying habits.
Yes, this essay made us change where we bought our clothes, our outdoor clothes.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes.
Honest to God. Hand to mouth. And my in-laws are all serious kayakers, so there's a lot of outdoor gear that goes into that. And I was like, none of this REI business.
Okay, and Annie Leonard again. We are all guilty of purchasing wear made. We are all guilty of purchasing wear made unsustainably, mainly because we didn't know any better. I would say you don't have many choices.
I think it's become mainly because you have choice, prices and all that stuff.
Sure. If you go to Walmart or Target, you're not going to get stuff like this.
Yeah.
This is where the idea. Here's the accommodation of the technical stuff. This is where the idea of sustainable manufacturing comes into play. Sustainable manufacturing, definition, is the practice of manufacturing quality products in a responsible manner to conserve resources, reduce environmental damages, and that are safe for employees and consumers. The idea of sustainable manufacturing is an innovative methodology that includes the 3R concept, reduce, reuse, recycle, along with supportive concepts such as recovering products at its in-use stage, redesigning products to simplify in-use process, and remanufacturing products to be more sustainable, recover, redesign, remanufacture.
Can
This
I
innovative,
interject real quick?
yeah.
So that sentence right there, the 3R concept, given that this is Outside Magazine, 3R is a thing that sort of floats around in like sustainability, conservation circles as a concept. So it's easy, he can just throw that out there. Whereas if this was getting published in something that didn't already have that slant, you might perhaps want to preface that with a common concept floating around in sustainability circles is what's known as the 3Rs, right? And then the second half of the sentence, so the along with supportive concepts such as, is directly from the Jael manufacturing, sustainable manufacturing article.
Yeah, the new piece of news in that piece on sustainable manufacturing is instead of recycle, reuse, and reduce, there are other things you can do.
Yeah.
You can redesign it so that it can be taken apart easily. You can remake it's moving to the 6 Rs.
Yeah, recover, resilient.
That's the single core concept of that piece.
But notice, if I hadn't pointed out to you, you haven't read that piece, you don't know that, and that's fine. One of the common mistakes that we see students make in this particular accommodation exercise is to try too hard to link it back. And so people would say, and this goes to Chris's question about references, people would say, sustainability experts, JL, and there's like 6 authors, have come up with this concept, and it's like, these readers don't care about that, right? You can just cut straight to the heart of the concept. Again, don't feel obligated to shoehorn references in or make it clear that, hey, this is the part where I'm referring back to the article. Like, we've read the articles
Yeah,
too.
we got it.
Yeah. Okay.
So, remanufacturing products to be more sustainable, recover, redesign, and reuse. This new innovative 6R methodology allows companies to move away from an open-loop way of thinking. Instead, it incorporates a life cycle assessment to evaluate the environmental and economic impact over a product's entire life, from pre-manufacturing to manufacturing to product use to post-use, thus changing the way we look at products from an open loop to a more sound, closed loop system of thinking. He's talking about life cycle analysis, closed loop systems, systems thinking, all in one paragraph, tossing it out. It's, I think, intuitively clear, but it's not heavy-handed. Let's see what comes next. Now, if you're still having a hard time picturing what sustainable manufacturing entails, then let me provide you with a company who practices, and it should be a company that. Companies aren't whose. So, there are grammatical mistakes here. With a company that practices it quite well. This particular company is Patagonia, known by many as the responsible company, or to Fortune magazine as the coolest company on the planet, man. Patagonia has made a name for themselves for their major efforts to reduce their carbon footprint. Quote, "Everything manufactured comes with a cost that exceeds its price," said Vincent Stanley, Patagonia's Footprint Chronicles director. That's a publication. The student went and read the publication that came out of Patagonia Corporation, went to their website, found their publications, pulled some stuff, information, quotes, off the Patagonia website. There it was. It's called secondary research. Quote, "We're wasting our brains and our only world on the design, production, and consumption of things we don't need and that aren't good for us," end quote. No page number, no reference, but that's what, there's a person talking to you that has a name. In 1993, Patagonia became the first company to manufacture fleece using post-consumer recycled plastic bottles to create recycled polyester for their shell jackets, base layers, and board shorts. By using recycled polyester, this lessened their dependence on petroleum as a raw material source. They also applied this innovative 6R approach to recycling wool and blending similar colors to eliminate the use of dye, thus ridding out toxic chemicals while simultaneously reducing water consumption. They also encourage consumers like us to send back worn-out Patagonia gear to either be recycled at its in-use stage or to be patched up by their care specialists. Can I send myself back to be patched up by a care specialist?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
In a sense, Patagonia is encouraging us to help them maintain an efficient closed-loop system for their products by sending in worn-out gear.
And here we're getting that solidarity.
Here we're getting that solidarity. Us, them, one community, we're together, we believe in this. And you can, not only do you buy the clothes, you can actually do stuff. You can send them back in. You can take action. Patagonia hasn't stopped there with their innovative measures. By evaluating the life cycle of each particular garment manufacturer, they've been able to generate a closed-loop approach all of the fabrics they use. To this day, they make every piece of garment using only 100% organic cotton, free of pesticides, as well as using 100% traceable down feathers, meaning that their geese are never force-fed nor plucked during their lifetime. With the help of the Nature Conservancy, Patagonia is also working with their wool suppliers to promote sustainable grazing to reverse over 100 years of overgrazing in 15 million acres within the Patagonian grasslands, while continuing to produce the finest quality wool available. For a more in-depth analysis of Patagonia's sustainable manufacturing measures, follow their footprint chronicles to track the life cycle assessment of all their products. Hopefully, this example has painted a more realistic picture for you about what sustainable manufacturing entails and why it's important, especially for the clothing industry. Patagonia hasn't always been this way. They meant to not be an environmentally obsessed company, but rather were just trying to make a bang for their buck. Quote, we can't pose Patagonia as the model of a responsible company. We don't do everything a responsible company can do, nor does anybody else we know. Quote, says Patagonia founder and CEO Yvon Chouinard. Anybody know who Yvon Chouinard is?
Unfortunately dead.
He died a few years ago. He was probably the most famous European mountain climber of the last half of the 20th century. He started Patagonia. He's a mountain climber.
Yeah. That's why earlier when I was saying your case, the Patagonia, you could have gone with the company, but you could have used him as a way
Yeah,
in.
and if you read Outside Magazine avidly, you probably, oh, I've heard of Chouinard. Oh, yeah. But we can illustrate how any group of people going about their business can come to realize their environmental and social responsibilities, then begin to act on them. How their realization is progressive. Actions build on one another. That's it.
Yep.
Okay.
He did give us
a list of references. He didn't cite them in the paper. He gave them to us.
Yeah.
So, a book by Yvon Chouinard and his corporate director. There's a book, The Responsible Company, What We've Learned in Patagonia's First 40 Years. There's the article that he was about sustainable manufacturing, and then the Patagonia publication, The Footprint Chronicles.
But again, we don't need that. If it makes you feel comfortable, we probably won't ding you for adding a referenceless list. The big thing is don't shoehorn it into the text itself.
Do you have any questions about this? It's not perfect. Probably not going to get published in Outside Magazine. But for the first time, somebody had read this article and tried doing it. Pretty good piece of work.
And
It does most of the things we've talked about.
I mean, certainly there are places where the writing could be improved or smoothed out, or perhaps things like I could imagine expanding. There's just one paragraph about the environmental ills, right? That's that long sentence about it's made in a factory and the 9-year-old and the toxics and the shipping and whatnot. You could definitely blow that out for a longer piece. Like I can think of all the things I would do to this to make it a publishable, article in Outside Magazine. But this is would be a perfect base for a good editor or professional writer. Somebody had a question, Paula?
Can we do kind of like a negative spin to it? So we use a company who, I don't know, perhaps doesn't have sustainable.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. So that's,
The only downside of that, in actual life, you might get sued for trashing the company in public. And the other thing is, if you're trying to do epidictic rhetoric, I hate to put it this way, people want to feel good. You don't want to say, look at these crappy jerks that are polluting the world, unless you can then say, here's how we could do this differently. Here's an example of. Think about how terrible you felt on the high-tech trash piece. Think about the Annie Leonard piece.
Yeah, at the
And
beginning.
she was at the beginning. She was working hard to help you feel hopeful that you could do something. Most people aren't going to read something, to be honest, if it's really depressing and it makes them angry and it just God, they want to say all those words I'm not allowed to say in class.
Yeah.
If you're going to do that, talk to us ahead of time. It's
About
pretty risky.
strategizing.
That would be much harder to do well.
Yes, exactly. You can do it and it's doable. It's just harder to do well. And one strategy might be to do a contrast. So if you had a good example and a bad example. So when we say case, again, remember the high-tech trash piece skips across cases. To keep it simple, and we're only looking for 3 to 5 pages, you probably want to just stay focused on one. But if you have something that seems like a natural fit, like I want to talk about these two contrasts, or I don't know.
Chris Carroll probably spent 6 months writing that one piece for National Geographic, doing all the work, at least. You've got a couple of weeks. We don't expect you to be Chris Carroll.
Yeah.
The other thing I will say, and I'm winking at you, at least one of the pieces we gave you says, here's a theory about sustainable systems analysis and here are 6 case studies where it's been used. The article itself says, here's a case in Golden, Colorado where they applied this.
Yeah.
Go find out everything that happened in Golden, Colorado, and get some names, some quotes, some data, some facts, some pictures, and use that as your case for your accommodation. I literally picked that. We share work. I was the one who read the 6 articles our colleagues gave us and picked 2 of them. I picked that one because it said, and here are 4, 5, 6 case studies of systems analysis that does this. The smart student would say, oh, that's where I'll find my case. Go do some research on this. I already have a lead.
Yeah. And as you just said, pictures. If you want to put pictures in, that's totally cool. We like pictures. The assignment, so class is done now. Assignment, it's due 2 weeks from tonight before class. There's a Dropbox on Canvas. I'll make sure that that's up and running and functional. And again, this is it. Rubber meets the road, right? You actually got to start turning stuff in now. This is when it gets exciting. So let us know if you have questions.
How do we title it? Like our name?
You can just here we have in the header the student name and like date and whatnot and the publication. But then give it some kind of title like it would actually have in the publication.
Pretty simple. Put your name.
What?
You need to put which of the 3 articles you chose, or you figure that out as you read?
I think we can figure it out.
No, give us that.
Give us that?
Yeah, give us that. Your name, where it's going, what the article was, and a title.
I'll add that to the assignment sheet.
Okay.
So I'll add a little section on specifically what to put in the header. Thank you for asking. Yeah, that's true, because it's easier to go in, grade. It'll take less time. We'll figure it out, but it's quicker to grade if we walk in knowing what we're looking at.
Well, we can sort them in piles so we know what to take.
Somebody over here said data, where the data is?
Okay, so it's data-driven, it's not engaging, it's full of charts and tables.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that we've had to strip this, to make this print properly into a PDF. There's no pictures, which there aren't a ton of pictures on the original, but there are several very engaging photos. You've seen National Geographic or magazines like that, you can imagine, right? Like high-definition photography, close-ups of people's faces, the picture of the young boy described in the first.
Yeah, which I have a picture of too. Yeah, my great frustration, I once pitched a story on soil and the loss of soil in America to the science editor of National Geographic. He was at a Washington conference that I was at. One of my friends was a hydrologist, and I pitched a story for the question of soil in America. And the guy listened to it and says, look, I can't print a story that I can't aim a camera at. I have to be able to aim a camera at what you're talking about. And we talked to him about it, and gosh darn, about 2 years later, they had taken our idea and given it to this really famous science writer, and they published a story in National Geographic on soil and soil loss in America. And Mike and I were really pissed.
You got ripped off.
Huh?
I read that article the other day.
Yeah, well, he got that idea from me and Mike Burkhart.
Really good article.
Yeah, it was.
That just makes it worse.
It's the guy who wrote the book. I can't remember his name. The guy who wrote the book, 1491, America Before Columbus.
Oh,
Pretty big fat book. Yeah, him.
oh.
Anyway.
Yeah, okay, anyway.
Okay.
Anyway, moving on.
Are there any last differences you see between what is a piece of forensic
Yes. Key term, forensic, you'll need this.
and
for
a
the
piece of
assignment.
epideictic?
Also key term, you'll need this for the assignment.
Greek, you know, you learn
Yeah.
2 Greek words every class.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Nothing else?
If you want to see the picture,
That's the high bases.
I found an article.
Nice, yeah. Is it in the PowerPoint too? Do you have a copy of it in the
Picture.
PowerPoint?
That's I have a similar picture in the PowerPoint. There's a professor at the University of British Columbia in journalism who has for years been taking his students around the world to photograph exactly this, the dumps, the cities, the people, the towns, the humans. And it's been about 4 years since I talked to him. I can't remember his name, but he let me have some of his photographs. I put a couple of them in the book I published, and one was in the slide. But it's the same thing. It's just heart-wrenching photographs.
All right.
Okay. Where'd my clicker go? Here's my clicker.
Oh.
All right, so we're going to talk about what happens when you move from e-waste to high-tech trash. In my business, that's called accommodation. It was a term invented by my colleague Jeannie Fanstock back in 1986. But everybody likes to start with a scientist, so we'll start with the big dog. Woof, bark, big dog.
Mr. Nanya?
Should be.
Can we mess with it? I'll
Yeah,
advance
would
it
you
for
give me the next one? I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. We'll play with it. Oh, you know what it is? It's the actual. There we go.
Okay. I know you're going to think this is funny, but I don't like giving lectures and telling her next one, because it seems kind of rude to my colleague.
It
you
is.
know?
It's very secretarial.
Yes.
Yeah.
She gets to do it to me later. So
Yeah.
is it working? Good.
Yep.
Okay, this is Albert Einstein talking about exactly your assignment. Anyone who's ever tried to present a rather abstract scientific subject, e-waste, in a popular manner, National Geographic, knows the great difficulties of such an attempt. Either he succeeds in being intelligible by concealing the core of the problem and by offering the reader only superficial aspects or vague allusions, thus deceiving the reader by arousing in him the deceptive illusion of comprehension. So you deceive and you lie your reader because you leave out the important stuff, the hard stuff. You just tell them a few things, then you think you know about it, and in fact you don't. Or you give me an expert account of the problem, but in such a fashion that the untrained reader is unable to follow the exposition, becomes discouraged from reading any further. If those two categories are omitted from today's popular scientific literature, surprisingly little remains. I think the piece in National Geographic remains. So, okay.
What? I don't know.
Got it.
Oh, okay.
As Einstein suggests, your assignment, how do you accommodate technical material for a non-expert audience? Now, in this case, a popular audience. It's tricky. Either you provide too little detail, too little complexity, you don't make any distinctions, you don't provide any concepts, and people don't really learn anything. And you haven't really been fair. That is, you haven't really accommodated. You have what I would call, you've dumbed it down, you've dummied it down. That's not your job. Einstein's trying to say, look, that's dummying it down. People really aren't learning anything. You don't know anything about e-waste. You just got some, feel good, or in this case, feel bad stuff. Or, you educate the holy whatnot out of somebody. This is sort of like you yell a lot of unos dos eight at them, and they quit reading. So your job with the articles that you're going to read and accommodate, your first assignment, is to figure out what's the core concept here. What's the core argument? What's the meat of this? If I really, if I have to talk about, 3 or 4 things, what are the 3 or 4 most important concepts, pieces of this argument, claims that this argument makes? That's a reading and analysis task. And you have to be able to explain why those are important, why those are significant, in a way that your reader will recognize and accept. And then I think you have to reframe that material not as a technical problem, but as a kind of everyday, ordinary problem in the case of Annie Leonard, of one of fairness and justice. not one of calculation and environmental ecological science. That's really weird. I don't know. Anyway, to do this, you are balancing the public's right to know things against their ability to understand things and their level of interest. Later on in the course, when we talk about public participation in science and technology and decision-making, building coalitions, this is one of the enduring debates in American society about the role of the public in deliberation, in decision-making. You know, are they smart enough? Are they bored? Are they too stupid? Are they engaged? Do they have a right to know, or are they capable of knowing? And we'll get to that later in the semester.
That's basically my entire dissertation, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So part of what you're doing here in accommodating things like anyone, you are providing information, but as a couple of you said, you're also trying to motivate people to change and motivate them to take action. It's one of the things you do. So generally, scientific texts accommodate to either popular audiences or policy audiences. When you do that, as you're thinking about it before you do it, you need to ask yourself some questions. What do these people know? Why are they reading this? Why does somebody read National Geographic? Because they're sitting on the toilet and they're going to be there for a while and they want to be entertained?
No.
Right? When I go to my father's house, my stepmother has a stack of National Geographics next to the toilet, right? That's where they live.
I think that people like I read it myself, like it's because it connects you with the world and things that you don't know or things that you care about, and as part of this, you know, the life experience, you want to know things. I mean,
Okay.
at least I want to know things.
You want to know them because you're generally curious,
I'm
and you
genuinely
have
curious
interest
and I
in
wanna-
these. Huh?
And I don't want to go through life being an idiot. I mean, there's a lot of people that have, but I have been, you know, it's fun for them, but that's not my case.
I think you're safe.
No,
Yeah, not an idiot. I think you're safe. So you want to think about, you know, why are they reading this? More important, or at least as important. Okay, this is really good. Okay, what are they going to do with this material? If you think about the forensic piece, the piece in the journal E-Waste, why do you read that journal? You don't. Why do you read an article like that? How's that?
Let's say maybe they have a yearly subscription.
Well, maybe to the Journal of the Total Environment. Yeah, but just because you have a subscription to it doesn't mean you read it. I subscribe to about 8 different academic journals. I trust me. I read them all cover to cover. Huh?
You're going to give a speech on it.
Okay, you're looking for information. You're writing an article. You're going to give a talk. Yeah, you're looking. One of my friends, one of my science buddies, looked at something I wrote and he said, "Carl, you really don't think anybody's going to read this whole article?" He says, "When I read an article, I just flip through it, skim through it to find the piece I'm looking for, the 2 or 3 pieces of data I need for a citation. Then I move on. I never read the whole thing. I just look for the data I need to plug it into the article, to the argument I'm making." So you want to think about, why do people read? National Geographic or Journal of the Total Environment, you read for very different purposes. You come to it with very different interests. You do different things with the material you read. You actually use it. In Julio's case, he uses it to be informed and to talk to friends. Hey, you go out to the bar and, hey, I was reading this article. It was really, or I'm hanging out with my friends and say, I read this article on such and such. You may laugh, but my wife and I will be sitting around in the evening having a glass of wine. She'll say, I read this article in the New York Times about e-waste and blah, blah, blah. And, it's kind of what we do in the evening. Sorry, that's kind of sad, isn't it?
Yeah, that sounds awesome, actually.
Yeah. What other kinds of documents do people read? What are they going to do with this material? These are the questions you need to be asking yourself when you get ready to accommodate something.
I would say, like, in going back to this, an article like that, I would read it and make me rethink about, okay, am I replacing my computer because of a fad, or am I replacing my computer because I need more computing power? So then you're getting more informed. I love shopping. I mean, I think shopping is a good thing. It's a therapy for certain things, so there's nothing wrong with it. But I try to be sensitive to what I need, and if I see something that I can live without, I'll get it. But if it's something that I say, well, I have like 2 of those and 1 of these and maybe 2 of those, but that's just a different this country long enough that I have become consumeristic just by default. And you have to like learn to change those patterns and try to like, you know, step back and look at the big picture. So I think some of those articles, it's trying to bring you like into a sense of stewardship and try to like, you know.
Which articles?
Like the one like e-waste and stuff like that, because like if you care about the
The
planet,
technical one or the National Geographic one?
the National Geographic.
Yeah, not the technical one,
Yeah.
which is the e-waste one.
But
They're not trying to get you to think about stewardship. They're not trying to get you to change the way you
the
shop.
e-waste one I will see like in Scientific America or something like that. I have seen something similar, but not to the technicality of that. It's more like a
Yeah.
journal. Like
Scientific American is.
Scientific American is about halfway between
Yeah.
A little
National
more on the
Geographic.
National
it's
And that.
it's like
Yeah.
that, but it's a little bit less personal than National Geographic. That is kind of want to immerse you into that feeling.
Right.
So.
I feel like we're getting to know you guys so much tonight. Like, I know who likes shopping. I know who lacks empathy. Like,
I don't actually even know how to read.
Well, Josh, not Joshua, will appreciate this. When I'm depressed and want to go shopping, I go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
You know, I buy all this wonderful organic food, and then I go home and cook up a storm, and my family eats, and I always take a bottle of wine with me. You know? I'm never going to go to the mall, but I go to Greenwise.
I go to the grocery store to get depressed.
I go to the grocery store to feel better.
Aw.
He works there, I don't. Okay. So, that is really weird.
Yeah, I don't know why it's-
Okay, so your three rhetorical concepts for tonight. In classical Greek rhetoric, Aristotle broke persuasive speech up into three kinds: forensic, epidictic, and deliberative. We're going to talk about forensic and epidictic today. We'll talk about deliberative later. Deliberative is functionally, you know, how do you make an argument for policy, persuade somebody about what we should be doing in the future. Aristotle was writing in the 4th and 5th century BC. He was writing mostly about an oral culture, not a written culture. Rhetoricians will point out that it's not fair to take his ideas and map them onto contemporary culture the way I'm doing, that a lot of what we do is a kind of hybrid. It's not purely forensic, purely epidictic. So that the Annie Leonard piece, as you'll see, is sort of both. But we're still going to use this as a kind of, we're going to oversimplify and clarify. It gives you a kind of sense of one looks like this, one looks like this. It's a pedagogical simplification. I hope it's not an oversimplification.
Compare myself to Aristotle all the time when I write.
Good. You laugh, but
I didn't know what to say. Good.
wow. You laugh, but as a child, my father used to read me Aristotle when I was going to bed.
Hey, I was
That
one
explains a
one
lot.
course away from honoring the classics, so I had to read a lot of
Yeah.
Aristotle.
And when he wasn't reading me Aristotle, he used to recite Beowulf in Old English to me from memory.
Really?
Yeah.
Punishment?
When I had been very, very, very bad. If it makes you feel any better, when my wife was taking her PhD exams in Old English, she had to memorize and recite a bunch of an Old English text called the Battle of Malden. And she was having trouble remembering it. I said, okay, well, you know, you start reciting and let me think about the translation. And so the way we did it is I acted it out. You know, Beardnos Hathanoda. Hey Hathanoda. Hey Hathanoda. He was a yelled. Beardnos has a spear. He shakes his spear. He moons the enemy. He was a brave man. So I acted it all out. This is, you know, it's like 1 in the morning. My wife is memorizing this stuff, and I'm acting it out in the bedroom, wearing nothing but my underwear.
Everything about this story is amazing.
So my wife goes in to take her final exam in Old English, and the
Oh.
professor says, okay, now you need to recite the first 110 lines of the Battle of Malden. She's trying, and she can't do it. She says, this is embarrassing, but my husband acted it out. I can only do it if you let me act it out. He said, oh yeah, I had to do that when I was graduate student. So my wife does the whole thing, acting it out, you know. The fight scene in the back. She was wearing more than her underwear.
I would hope so.
You guys know my wife. Sorry.
Yes.
Okay, erase all that out of your brain.
So, what's the rhetorical situation, Carl?
You don't know where that's it.
Okay, where was I? So, how do you get from there to classical Greece? You started it, Chris, with Aristotle.
Greeks love that too.
Huh?
Greeks love that stuff too.
That's true.
Oh yeah, but
They had
we're not
rationale.
going to get into what the Greeks did. You know.
Yeah.
So forensic rhetoric in ancient Greece was what they did in the court. Forensic rhetoric is about facts. What exists? How do you know? How sure of you are this? You're not making any value judgments. You're just stating this is the case. Here are the facts. Here's what exists. In our contemporary culture, forensic rhetoric is mostly like the journal e-waste, or the technical article e-waste. It talks about what the facts are. It spends a great deal of time talking about establishing the authority of those facts, the grounds on which you know those facts. It appeals to our scientific sense of rigor, thoroughness, objectivity. It appeals to our faith in standard methodology. We'll look at some of this in a minute. It appeals to, in science, forensics, our sense of precision, scientific objectivity. It usually breaks a problem down into a series of pieces, and it's analytic, so it breaks it into pieces and treats each one of them separately in a kind of cumulative fashion. It progresses stepwise from beginning to piece to piece to piece to piece. Forensic rhetoric tends to have a very spare style. It never elaborates when it doesn't need to. It typically uses the omniscient voice of the scientist or the fact person who knows everything. That voice is usually anonymous. You almost never see an individual or run across an individual name in a piece of forensic scientific rhetoric unless it's the 101 names in citations over here. You never really run into individual people. Almost every statement in a piece of forensic rhetoric is going to be heavily qualified and hedged. They'll tell you the conditions under which this happened, how they knew it, what the exceptions are, what's been left out. We'll look at some of these.
What was that characteristic of that spare style? Like when you're talking, you said spare style.
Yes.
What did it mean again?
Spare just means the opposite. If you think of the beginning paragraph to the high-tech trash piece that I read you, where we're setting a scene and we're talking about things that aren't necessarily essential facts. In science, all that stuff about the scene would be irrelevant. It would be purple prose. It would be metaphorical or artistic. So spare is, nobody in here is old enough to remember the old American TV show Dragnet, where the cop is interviewing, Chris does. The cop is interviewing somebody, he says, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. Keep all your other BS to yourself, just the facts.
Watch that show all the time.
Yeah, I grew up with it. But a spare style means using as few words as possible.
So few accessories, like it's like the language used only like the data. Yeah, just that.
Yeah, essentially just the data, just the facts, only absolute minimal necessary pieces of information and words. Most scientific articles tend to be quite short, as opposed to articles in humanities or social sciences journals that tend to be quite long, because like me, we like to hear ourselves talk. Okay, a couple of people smile. Thank you. I feel better.
This is the difference between, in the high-tech trash piece, there's discussion of specific chemicals, right? And so the difference is, in the high-tech trash, we know some of the chemicals. In the technical piece, we know all of the chemicals, but in the technical piece, we have no idea what they smell like. But in the high-tech trash piece, we know a lot about what they smell like through the e-waste, right? So it's not even just about using the simplest language possible, it's making choices about what information goes in.
Okay, so, and I will give you some examples of what this looks like. This is the overview. So yeah, forensic rhetoric, it's the language of the court. As some of you said over here, it talks about past events. It establishes facts and the authority of those facts. It appeals to rigor, methodology, precision, objectivity. It's analytic, it's omniscient. It answers the reader's questions, what are the facts, and how do you know? That's really all it does. Here are the facts, and here's how I know those facts. Epidictic rhetoric, by contrast, is usually, or at least initially, it was language about public events. In Greece, and even now, it's the language of praise and blame. Epidictic rhetoric, so we just had the 30th anniversary of the Challenger disaster. You know, and when that happened, the president got up and gave a moving speech about, you know, the astronauts giving their lives for their country, and, you know, I can't remember his words, you know, boldly going where no one has gone before, you know, leading America into a brave new world. Epidictic rhetoric is the rhetoric you use on occasion for praise, for blame. It tends to, as somebody said, it tends to be about the present. It also tends to consolidate people's identity or values. It tends to bring you into a community. So when the president talks about the Space Shuttle Challenger, you know, he talks about the American community and the space program, and these people are all Americans. He tries to make us feel a sense of unity and oneness. The best example, I'm sorry for those of you for whom this doesn't make a lot of sense, I tried to gloss it in the lecture. The most famous example of epidictic rhetoric in America is Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Anybody know anything about the Gettysburg Address? Okay. What did Lincoln do? And why was he giving that speech?
That the speech for the abolition of slavery? Not that one? Okay.
Amy? Anybody want to help out? What had just happened? Anybody know what Gettysburg refers to? The Battle of Gettysburg in the Civil War, where like 50,000 people died in a single day. 50,000 Americans were butchered in a day. And he's giving a speech at the graveyard. He's trying to hallow this ground. But if you listen to American historians, what they will say is one of the things the president was doing, and Gettysburg was a turning point in that Civil War. The Union had been losing up to that point. After that war, the tide turned and the Union tended to win. And what the president was doing in giving that piece of epidictic speech, praising these heroes who had given their lives, he was trying to get everybody to accept the fact that we are one Union. We are Americans. We are the United States of America, not the separate states of the Confederacy. One of the things that's important is epidictic can consolidate a sense of community. Some of you, when you were looking at the high-tech trash piece, there's a sense of we are one world, we are one community, we're all in this together. What's happening in Guizhou, China, and in Silicon Valley, you know, is the same. You are trying to appeal to a set of core values and get everybody who appeals to those values to agree with you and come into a sense of community. Oddly enough, jokes are like this. When you tell jokes, a joke is only funny. I'm trying to. Have I told my dean's joke?
Maybe.
Have I told you the joke about the guy going into the cannibal delicatessen? I've told you the joke about the cannibal delicatessen?
I think so.
Okay. When you tell jokes, they are only funny. People only laugh if they share your values, right? If I tell a racist or a sexist joke, only the people who are racist and sexist are going to laugh. Other people are going to be really offended, push away. And it happens to me all the time, my age and all this. When I'm around a bunch of non-academic guys, white guys my age, they'll start telling jokes about women. And they expect me to laugh because it's a bunch of guys, you know, who share this, and, you know, what do you do with women and your wives? I never laugh because I kind of like my wife, you know. I'm not part of that community. It's not funny. So I'll tell you my joke.
Cannibal delicatessen.
The English professor walks into the cannibal delicatessen. And you got to remember, I used to be a dean. The English professor walks into the cannibal delicatessen, he looks at the menu on the wall, and it says, English professor brains, $1 a pound. Research particle physicist brains, $2 a pound. Dean's brains, $20 a pound. The guy's a little offended, right? He says, wait a minute, an English professor's brains are only $1 a pound, but a dean's brains are $20 a pound? The guy looks at him and says, do you know how many deans it takes to get a pound of brains? If you laugh, have I told a joke about sex in the English department?
No,
Okay. If you laugh, you are part of a community, and I'm building a community that says there's us against them. There's students and professors and workers against management and administration. Deans are management, right? that joke is only funny if you share those values. But if you start laughing, we are, hey man, we're like this, We are identifying with each other and we're solidifying a community. Epideictic rhetoric, I think the high-tech trash piece tends to solidify, we are people who care about this. We are the green community. We, care about those families. So not only does it convey information, it creates a sense of solidarity. It's one of the things epideictic rhetoric does and why it's important to us. It answers, instead of what are the facts and how do you know, you have to answer these questions. Who cares? So what? Why do I care about this? Make me care. And, so what's the difference? Who cares? So what? So accommodation of scientific text for popular readers typically takes the form of epideictic. You are right. It typically tells a story. It has a narrative form. They usually involve individual people, either the researcher or the people involved in the story. Those people's individual lives illustrate the consequence, the meaningfulness of the story. People read scientific documents to gather facts, to strengthen an argument. They're cherry-picking facts. People read epideictic because they want to be interested, they want to be informed, they want to be engaged, they want to have cool things to talk with their friends about, they don't want to be boring people. As a result of this, epideictic accommodations tend to appeal to people's sense of wonder, to people's sense of how terrible this is, how amazing this is, how beautiful this is, sometimes how practical and useful this is, not to that abstract sense of, okay, now I have a bunch of facts. Now that's my overview.
So one thing, so this one would, if you're epididic, would that, the same thing, you could use the same writing just to convey something that is a fallacy, or not?
Help me out here.
Like as an example, I can use the same method of engaging or trying to get those people to feel what I'm trying to convey, but for the wrong cause or not.
Oh yeah,
enough.
definitely. Rhetoric is a
Could,
pharmacon.
while in this one, with the forensic one, it would be less prone to do that because it's very factual.
Yes and no. I'll give you the yes and a little of the no, and Kegel is going to disagree a little bit. I think I said this on the beginning of the semester. Rhetoric, language, writing is what the Greek or the French philosopher Derrida calls a pharmacon. It can be used for good or for ill. It's like a hammer. You can use it to drive a nail to build a house for a poor person. You can use it to kill somebody, bludgeon them to death. You can use epideictic. I hate to use this example, but Adolf Hitler was brilliant at using epideictic rhetoric to bring the fatherland together to exterminate other people.
But the scientific part, like when he was doing
the scientific part
was wrong and not truly like backed up by data. Well, it had data of the measurements they did, but it was all based on these ancient things.
As close as I can come to saying that scientific. I'm going to separate forensic from scientific. A scientific article that has been through peer review, blind peer review. Does everybody know what blind peer review is? Okay, you send an article out to a journal, they take your name off it, they send it to 3 other experts in the field who don't know who you are and you don't know who they are, and they read it and they make their best professional judgment about whether it's good, bad, accurate, inaccurate. Usually they will give you like 5 or 6 single-space pages of things you have to change that they didn't like and you have to fix. And you spend another 3 months doing that. 3 different people do that. The theory is it's not perfect, but it tends to catch the worst offending pieces. So you send it to somebody who's an expert in research methodology and they check your methodology. You send it to somebody who's an expert in e-waste and they make sure that you've got your data right. That is, so the scientific piece, I think, is probably as close to true or accurate. I'll leave true out. Accurate as we're going to get because of the mechanisms that journals have put into place. Paula.
But it comes back to that question that we were answering last week where, some people aren't going to accept the facts because
Sure. Sure. Even a scientific piece like this, like the one you read, it is perfectly possible that people will not accept the facts as facts. They will say, oh, peer review is just a bunch of cronies supporting each other.
God, I wish.
Yeah, I once sent one of my articles out to a journal. It's actually an article that won a National Research Award eventually. But I sent it out to a journal, and they shipped it out to 3 readers. And I got this one review back from this person who was really hard on me. Said, I like this, but I've got all these problems, and gave me all this stuff I had to do. It was really useful, but read me the riot. Article came out, and one of my closest, oldest friends said, I didn't know that was your article. I was the reviewer who gave you hell on that piece. It was my friend Carolyn Miller. It was like somebody I've known for 30 years and written articles with. She didn't know it was me. I didn't know it was her. And she was incredibly strict. My article was a whole lot better as a result. So peer review, sometimes it's really, peer review. But, even if the facts, if you will, are reliable and accurate and transparent, that doesn't mean that people who are predisposed, who have the confirmation bias, they will only agree with the facts that confirm their position, are going to accept it. You see this even in scientific journals, when there are controversies and people are on separate sides of a controversy.
The other thing too is that your starting point for saying that, Julio, is like this idea that you could use this format for ill. And I read a lot of climate change blogging and online writing and digital conversations, and one of the favorite tactics for climate change skeptics and deniers is not like weird conspiracy theories about the UN taking over the world, even though that is in fact a thing on the internet if you would like to go find that. It is about using the terminology, using the terms of science, using the language of science, using the lots and lots of technical terminology, lots of citations to make the case against climate change. And so at that point, it becomes very difficult for people who are not themselves climate scientists to distinguish between, well, I read that 97% of climate scientists think climate change is anthropogenic and happening, but I don't have access to those journals. But this looks like what science rating is supposed to look like, and I can read this, and it's on the internet, and this person seems to know what they're talking about. So I think there are places where absolutely the forensic gets kind of co-opted.
Misused.
And this is complicated, right? Because science is supposed to be agonistic. Science is supposed to
Fight
enable
with
space,
each other, disagree.
right, for people to disagree and present competing theories of the facts. So it makes it even more difficult for somebody who is not the intended reader of this to figure out what's going on.
All right.
Joanne wanted to say something. Sorry.
Is that like what Wikipedia is doing? A lot of the stuff is not really.
Well,
Nobody can put anything on there.
Wikipedia is an interesting example, actually, because I think Wikipedia, sure, anyone can put anything on there, and there are funny cases of like weird stuff. But if you go and look at the editorial chatter behind, so you can actually go into Wikipedia and you can read the editorial discussions that are happening behind the scenes as the pages get edited, and they're essentially doing what scientists are supposed to be doing in terms of hashing out these issues.
Yeah, a better metaphor for this is if you think about, I'm thinking about agonism. The theory of science is that if each scientist doubts as strenuously as she can the other scientist's work, and vice versa, not because they don't like each other, but because they are both mutually committed to the notion that as an institution, the scientific project will come closer to truth or accuracy if everybody is held to absolutely scrupulous standards. It's just like being in court. You've got a prosecutor and a defender, and they're arguing against each other. And in court, you have a jury. In science, you have the discipline. You have the reviewers. You have the readers of the journals. You have the discipline to decide over time, which is the stronger argument. I better get moving or we'll never get out of here.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the difference between forensic and epideictic rhetoric by contrasting very specifically. Now, I've talked in abstract. Let's look at what that means. So here is the opening from the piece on e-waste from Scientific Environment. It starts by defining what e-waste is, separating e-waste from WEEE. Wee! Waste, electric, and electronic equipment. I was looking forward to that. And so it wants to,
I like that you planned that.
so, it wants to be authoritative and credible. So it gives you not one, but two different ways of calculating. We calculated the amount of e-waste in the world. Not only does it tell you how they did it, it tells you they did it twice. So you get a paragraph like this. Summing the available data indicates the global production, so it doesn't prove, it indicates, I'm hedging, that the global production of e-waste was at least 13.9 million tons per year in the middle of this decade, specific time period. So got to be precise, this figure does not include Latin America, Africa, Canada, and Russia, and does not include growth over the last 4 years. They're hedging, trying to be very specific. An independent estimation was obtained using equation 1, and then they give you the equation, using data from table 1 and the data from the total number of computers, mobile telephones, fixed line telephones, televisions, radios, everything has a citation here, all the components. The total e-waste production of 11.7 million tons per year is similar to the above calculation of e-waste produced in rich countries. Again, the total global e-waste production will be considerably higher because some of the data are 6 years old, so they're giving you the lowest one. In reality, it's probably going to be worse. How do you know? The data is dated. Similarly, the mass of we produced will be higher because it includes heavy electrical items such as refrigerators and air conditioning units. Adjusting the total calculated figure of 1.3 million tons per year for a 20% growth of the world's GDP over the last 5 years gives us 16.8, so they're giving you the formula, they're being transparent, they're showing you, this is my 12-year-old daughter who gets the answers in math class, but the teacher makes her show her work, not just give the answer to make sure she did it right. And then you get, it's probable that the actual global e-waste production is 20 to 25 million tons per year at the lower end of the UN Environmental Committee's estimate of 25 to 50 tons per year. They're hedging it. It's probable. It's absolutely transparent. Here's what we know. Here's where we got the data. Here's the formula. Here's the raw data. You can calculate it yourself. We did it 2 different ways to make sure we were on the right page. That's, I think the technical term is anal retentive. That's scientific methodology. You trust them because they're not hiding anything. They're killing you with detail. As opposed to the National Geographic. Stop that. Where you get, this is the same thing. What does that piece of calculation look like? Computers are hardly the only electric hardware hounded by obsolescence. A switch over to digital high-def television broadcasts is scheduled to be completed in 2009, rendering inoperable TVs that function perfectly today but receive only an analog signal. As viewers prepare for the switch, about 25 million TVs are taken out of service yearly. In the fashion-conscious mobile market, 98 million US cell phones took their last call in 2005. All told, the EPA estimates that in the US that year, between 1.5 and 1.9 million tons of computers, TVs, VCRs, cell phones, and other equipment were discarded. If all the sources of electronic waste were tallied, it could total 50 million tons a year worldwide, according to the UN Environmental Program. So the article on e-waste, the technical one, is really precise. It explains its calculations. It provides the total amount, but it qualifies that claim. It tells you what data was left out, Latin America, Africa, Canada, Russia. It identifies possible sources of inaccuracy, and it describes the figure and says, well, this is 20 to 25 million at the low range. A high-tech trash piece, the one you're looking at, by contrast, is concerned with telling you an engaging story. It doesn't give you exact figures. It doesn't give you a transparent methodology. It talks about things that are familiar to readers, such as, your TVs that are analog TVs are gonna be replaced by high def. It tends to talk about, fashion conscious people. It gives you an estimate of 50 million tons. It said it could total. It's not inaccurate, but that's at the very end of the range, so it's as impressive as possible without being inaccurate. If I go out on a limb here, I think this piece is sort of like the Annie Leonard piece. It's, at least me, did anybody have to get rid of their TV in 2009? I was really pissed off when I had a perfectly functioning color TV and I had to get rid of it. A, that's wasteful, and go spend, I don't know how many hundreds of dollars to get a high def, digital TV when the old one worked perfectly well. And that really pissed me off. I think these guys, when they talk about, you're going to have to replace them, there's a sense in which they're trying to appeal to your sense of frustration and what's been done to you. At the time, my wife and I had just moved, and we had a house sitting empty, and we were supporting 2 houses, and coming up with the money for a new TV wasn't easy. Here's another example. Okay, I don't want to walk through this. It also, the accommodation here, also, it's much more verbal. Things are hounded to obsolescence. They're preparing to make the switch. You took your last call. Things are discarded and thrown away. It's more verbal. There's more action going on. Just the words they choose. But those are also not technical terms. Here's another. This is an example. I'm going to give you 3 comparisons so you'll see, what you do. This is talking about recycling. E-waste recycling involves the disassembly, so definition, the disassembly and destruction of equipment recovered to recover materials. Because nobody knows what recycling is, right? You have to have a technical definition with a citation to tell you what the word recycling means. Recycling can recover 90% of useful materials from a computer and 45% of the materials from a cathode ray tube. In rich countries such as Japan, high-tech recycling operations function well with little environmental impact. Every sentence has a citation. Any ecological benefits of recycling are more than offset if the waste has to be transported long distances due to the negative environmental effects of fossil fuel consumption. So they're doing life cycle analysis and energy balance. Gee, recycling doesn't work if you do it and you have to move things around a lot. You burn a lot of fuel to get there. However, recycling has a lower ecological impact than landfilling or incinerating e-waste. Here's the high-tech trash version. Even if this obsolete equipment remains in attics and basements indefinitely, never reaching a landfill, this solution has its own indirect impact on the environment. In addition to toxics, e-waste contains goodly amounts of silver and gold and other valuable minerals that are highly efficient conductors of electricity. In theory, recycling gold from old computer motherboards is far more efficient and less environmentally destructive than ripping it from the earth, and often by surface mining that imperils the pristine rainforests. I'm reading intentionally here. You get a familiar scene. You get the stuff that's up in my attic. In my case, it's out in the garage. I can identify with this because there's old machines in my garage. I don't know what to do with them. We don't hear about useful materials. We hear it's full of silver and gold. Let's go prospecting. You don't get dry academic stuff. You get, again, verbs, ripping it from the earth, and it imperils pristine rainforests. You get a much more engaging, emotional kind of story. My last example. And none of this is inaccurate, but this is more interesting to read. It's more verbal, it's more active, there are characters, there are everyday, ordinary things. Here's my last example. So, the last example that we take from the e-waste article, they're talking about the human costs of processing. This process can be automated or carried out by hand. In poor countries, there's a risk that children may be employed to separate e-waste components. An open flame is often used to free components, which may result in exposure to volatilized contaminants. I don't want to be exposed to volatilized contaminants. Do you? Whatever the hell that means. Oops. Here's the paragraph from National Geographic. It's the second paragraph. It's the same story. What's the human cost? In one, it's you're being exposed to volatilized contaminants. Choking. I pull my shirt over my nose and approach a boy of about 15. His thin frame wreathed in smoke. This is not spare. This is, in science, this would be purple prose. But it's making an affective, emotional appeal that's very powerful. Karim says he's been tending such fires for 2 years. He pokes at one meditatively, and then his top half disappears as he bends into the billowing soot. He hoists a tangle of copper wire off the old wire he's using for fuel and douses the hissing mass in a puddle. With the flame retardant insulation burned away, a process that has released a bouquet of carcinogens and other toxics, the wire may fetch $1 from a scrap metal dealer. So you get, you know, his thin frame wreathed in smoke. He's poking meditatively at a fire. He's doing things. It's not impersonal. We know his name. We know his age. We know what he does for a living. It ends, what do you make of this phrase? It releases a bouquet of carcinogens. What's significant about that expression?
The contrast between bouquet, which would imply
Yeah,
flowers.
a bouquet of flowers or a bouquet of carcinogens. It's a very ironic, bitterly ironic contrast that you get to figure out for yourself.
How that's kind of a metaphor for gold being $1.
Yes, and it's kind of a metaphor for what's worth, for gold being worth $1.
Just the contrast again.
Yeah. I think the unspoken question here, he does all this, we'll get a scrap, fetch $1 from the unspoken, what's the unspoken question at the end of this paragraph?
Why?
What's a human life worth? A human life is worth $1. Here's a picture that my friend from British Columbia took. This is from Ghana. This is not Karim, but you know, Karim's alter ego in Africa. And this is what life looks like. This is where this young man lives and works. And that paragraph didn't ask you, but it says, you know, he does all this, is facing the carcinogens, not the volatilized contaminants. And, you know, it'll get him $1. Well, you know, what's a human life worth? In this case, about $1. It's pretty bitter irony. So, I'm summarizing. I'm done and I'm summarizing. And we will look at this, take a break, and we will summarize again for you. But if you're accommodating things, epideictic accommodations for everyday readers, they're written for people who read for curiosity and pleasure. My version of this is, hey, I was reading an interesting article about what happens to electronics the other day as I'm sitting around talking to friends drinking a beer. That's what you do with this information. Heavy-handed education, unos dos eight in the deficit model style, isn't going to work. You've got to get away from that forensic style. It's got to be, more than anything else, it's got to be interesting, engaging, and I hope compelling. So you need to tell a story, use narrative. You need to use individual people, name them if possible. Facts are useful to you, but only if they pique emotion. Facts, you know, aren't useful in and of themselves. Facts are useful because they have an affective or emotional power. You should use everyday, ordinary materials that people can identify with. And as the woman in the back said, you should use informal language, not language that's off-putting. Questions about any of this? We're about to take a break. We will look at an example and we will summarize this again, but there are two
And
questions.
look at the assignment sheet.
And we will look at the assignment sheet.
So are you saying that we should go more towards the National Geographic, or should we put a little bit more fact than what the National Geographic does, but keep that narrative style?
I'll give you
And my
a sum-
question was similar to that because we, for some of our other classes, have to write papers, and they would just, if we wrote anything like the style,
Like the National Geographic?
yeah, we just
Yeah,
don't
no. We want that.
No, we don't want you writing. Your job is not going to. We'll look at the assignment sheet and we will answer these questions in some detail. We will show you an example of an epideictic accommodation written by a student in this class that's pretty good. We will talk about that in the second half of the class. I'll give you a more detailed answer. The first answer is, if you are accommodating a piece of technical material for popular, non-expert audience, you are not writing a paper for my friend Senshaw. If you write National Geographic for Senshaw, you get an F. If you write Senshaw for National Geographic, you get an F. That is, you have to think about one of the things we will say as part of the assignment is, you tell me, what publication, website have you written this for? Where are you thinking this would be published? And we will evaluate it in that context. Not, this is an article on systems analysis for Dr. Skay. This is a piece that explains system analysis to Carl's mother-in-law, who lives in rural Texas.
And
It makes it
subscribes
interesting.
To Reader's Digest, for example.
Or to Reader's Digest.
Yeah.
So we will answer your question in some details. The short version goes, you know, you're writing for National Geographic,
Sure.
for
That's
Outside
around the
Magazine,
table.
for Psychology Today, for Scientific American, for
Wired
Wired Magazine. You are not writing a seminar paper for a professor in a course, because your only job there is to show them how much you learned, really. That's what you do. See, I learned what you wanted me to learn.
Yeah.
I can regurgitate it. Why would, trust me, I've been grading student papers for 30 years. Why would anybody read that if they weren't being paid to? Really? You want to be writing stuff that people read because it's, wow, this is really fun and fascinating. I didn't know half of this stuff. You know, he wants to be more interesting. We will answer those questions in some detail, but that's a very fair question. Other questions before we take 10-minute break? Take 10, be
Okay.
back.
8 p.m. Sure.
Oh,
I need to go get some more water.
Oh my gosh.